Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Bava Metzia Daf Zayin. Today's stuff is sponsored by Eitan and Penina Lipsker in honor of all the women Daf Yomi learners, especially those who make an extra human effort to join the Hebrew Zoom at 6:20 every morning. The Ad Kedusha and Torah to Am Yisrael. Maybe we be blessed to continue to learn Torah daily and Lagdil Torah Ulahadira. Okay, I'm going to start with a quick review of yesterday's stuff because I want to make sure that we have it down pat and clear. So, Rabbi Zera started with this question on Amud Aleph, basically talking about if two people are grabbing the tallit and one grabs it from the other, is that valid? And then we said, well, in what case, right, where the person was silent and then screamed after the other person. So how do we understand the silence and then the complaining, and do we take it into consideration or not? But then we said, if you're going to say that it doesn't work, okay, what about if the person didn't grab the entire thing, but sanctified it? Would that be valid? So from there, we got into this question. We said, let's try to learn it from this bathhouse case. And from there, we got into this bathhouse where there's this debate between two people about, these two people are arguing. It's mine. And one sanctified the whole thing. And the rabbi said, we don't know what to do here. Let's just not use the bathhouse. And then they go and they say, please go ask Rav Tachlifa when you get to the Kafri. And it turns out when they got to Shiur, Rabbi asked Rav Hamnuna. And Rav Hamnuna said, oh, it's obvious from this Mishna, even though it wasn't really so obvious from the Mishna. And Rabbi said, I don't know what you're talking about. But let's go through very quickly what happened here. So Rav Hamnuna proved it from the Mishna. He said basically, it says in this Mishna that Safek Bechor case, Hamotzi Mechaber Alav Haraya, meaning the way he thought it meant is it maybe belongs to the Kohen, maybe belongs to the Israel. We don't know. Therefore, whoever grabs it, and this is where it's connected to, this is a very famous law, by the way, called Takfo Kohen. If the Kohen grabs it, Rav Hamnuna says he gets to keep it. And what do you see here? If he didn't grab it, he doesn't get to keep it. But if he did it, he did, which means basically this is safek, maybe it's the property of the Kohen. And yet, even when it's not his property, it's sanctified because it says no matter what, you can't work this animal. So he says, look, those two things go hand in hand. Meaning, even if you theoretically could have access to it and financially it could be yours, but we don't know, right? It's like two people fighting. And yet it's going to be sanctified in any case. Now, it's a very weird comparison because it's not like the Kohen sanctified it himself, but let's just go with his comparison. To which Rabbi says, what kind of a comparison are you making? First of all, you're wrong. This is not the moment of the Kohen. This is not 50-50. Maybe it's the moment of the Kohen, maybe not. You misunderstood the Mishnah. When the Mishnah said, the burden of proof is on the one trying to get it. But he means basically is always the burden of proof is on the Kohen. The Kohen has no access to this until he can prove it's really a Bechor. It's not the moment of the Kohen. And yet it's sanctified, which shows what? There's zero connection between mammon and sanctification. You understand? Rav Hamnuna was trying to say mammon and sanctity go together. If you have a potential, you're 50-50, it could be yours, then you can sanctify it. Even though, again, it wasn't really the Kohen sanctifying. And that's the second point Rabbi makes is, number one, it's not the mammon of the Kohen. Why is it sanctified then? Well, because it's possibly was born sanctified, because Bechor is born sanctified. So it's two totally separate things. Then we have Rav Hananya, who tried to prove it from this braita of Sfeikot Nichnesim L'dir Litaser. Prove that Rabbi was right. This is definitely not the moment of the Kohen. Why not? Because if it was the mammon of the Kohen, how on earth could if it was potentially maybe mammon of the Kohen, meaning potentially the Kohen could have property rights to this and claim ownership of the animal. Well, then how on earth could you put this animal put the animal in the pen, lihitasel? There's no way you could use this and count your animals as maser behema if perhaps it's not even your own. How can you, and the words are, poter mamono b'mamono shel kohen. How can you exempt your animals? In other words, tithe your animals using something that's not yours, which must mean the fact that you can put this animal in your pen must mean 100% it's yours. Okay, it's 100% the Yisrael's. The Kohen has zero financial connection to it, which again, all this means is this case has nothing to do with our case, because our case is there's a debate about who owns it, and one goes ahead and sanctifies it. Okay, I'm not going to review the next part, which is basically Abaye thought that it was a bad proof, but then reinstates the proof of Rav Hanania. That was where we ended. So now I just wanted you to have the big picture. Now we're just going to end this section with two more parts. One is to explain a side point, and then one is to get back to the bigger question. So if we can't learn it from here, this Mishna, Safek Bechor, Motzi B'chaver Alav Haraya, the Rav Nuna tried to learn from there, then what's the story with the bathhouse? Was the sanctification valid or was it not? So first we want to deal with this braita that Rav Hanania brought. Rav Hanania brought a braita that said, Hasfeko nichnesim ladir lehitaser. What's a little bit confusing about the sugya, and I want to make clear, there's two different sfeko going on here. One is it safek bechor or not bechor? Is the animal sanctified or not, right? Is this animal, we don't know what its status is. Was it the firstborn or was it not? The second thing is, do we know, right? Is it a safek about who it belongs to? And that we basically neutralized. We said there's no way it's a safek about who it belongs to. When it comes to the property rights for this animal, it's 100% the Yisrael. And that was the whole thing Abaye was proving, because he said if it's a safek of who owns the animal, for sure you can't use that for your animal tithes. There's no way. There's no such thing. And that's how we ended it. It has to be asiri vaday, not asiri safek. Okay, so just don't get confused between the two different sfeikot. It's confusing. But one says the safek goes into the dir lit aser, and the other says you can't use the safek for maaser behema. That seems contradictory, but we're talking about two different sfeikot. One is in the world of isur beheter. Is this sanctified? Is it not? Is this an animal that was a bechor already? And then, since we're not sure, okay, we actually say we can tithe it, and that's going to be a bit of a question right now. How do we do that? How do we use it for animal tithe? But the other issue is if it's not definitely the property of the owner of the animals, because maybe it belongs to a Kohen, for sure you can't use it for the tithes. Okay, so that's the difference between the two sfeikot. So Amalei Rav Achami Difti LeRavina, but now he's going to raise a problem with saying that if it's safek bechor, maybe it's sanctified of the sanctity of a bechor, maybe not. You can still do maaser, you can use it for your animal tithes. How could that possibly be? My sfeikot. We're not sure if it's a bechor or not. What does it say about the animal tithes? It says, Ha'asiri yihiyeh kodesh l'Hashem. The 10th animal will become sanctified to God. What do we learn from here? Yeh kodesh amar Rachmana v'lo shekfar kadosh. You can't possibly have that 10th animal be an animal that is already sanctified. There's no way. So you can't take an animal that was maybe a bechor and use it for animal tithes, which is something we thought, obviously you can. Now they say, no way can you do that. Okay? So it's already sanctified. You can't make something sanctified. It's already sanctified. Ella, it must be safek pidyon peter chamor. This braita that said the sfeikot can go into the dir lit aser is not a case where maybe the animal was the firstborn to the cow. Okay? It's a case where we had 10, okay, we're going to see that there were 10 of them, okay? We had a safek, let's just start with one safek. We had a doubt about an animal, whether it was the firstborn to the donkey. Okay, so we have a donkey that gives birth, and we just don't know was it the firstborn or not. Now, a peter chamor is not a kosher animal. It's not sanctified but in other words, the truth is it is sanctified, but what do you need to do? You don't bring that animal to the temple and, bring it to the Kohen, but that animal it's a safek anyway, you're not going to bring it to the Kohen, but theoretically, the law of Bechor is that you redeem it with a seh, okay, with a sheep or a lamb. So now, safek pidyon peter chamor, you have a case where you're not sure. Uchi de Rav Nachman, to Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabbi Avahu. In other words, then the case is not where the seh that you're going to now redeem this potentially, maybe, safek animal that was maybe sanctified from birth, but the seh was not sanctified from birth. That's the whole beauty of what we're going to get here. That it's not a case where the animal itself was maybe sanctified already from birth, and then you can't use it for maaser behema because you have to create sanctity to it. But here we have a case where the Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rabbi Avahu Yisrael sheyesh lo asara sfek pitrei chamor b'toch beito. You have 10 animals that are potentially 10 firstborn donkeys that are safek 10, whether they're firstborn donkeys. What do you do? Well, you have two issues here. Number one, you have to redeem them with a seh, possibly. Or you do maaser behema with them because maybe they're not, right? If it's not the firstborn, then you have to do maaser behema. So what do? Mafrish alehem asara sein u'masran vehen shelo. You take 10 seh and you redeem the 10 seh for the 10 hamorim, for the 10 donkeys. And then you put them through and count them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and the 10 becomes sanctified. Because in this way, you're not sanctifying something that was already sanctified. Okay? And that resolves that side issue. That's a very side issue. Let's get back to our main point. My have alad masuta. What happens with the bathhouse? Was the sanctification valid or was it not? Tashma, let's learn from here. To Amar Rabbi Avahu, have a uvda be Rav Chisda be Rav Huna, upashta mehada amarav. Okay, so there was a case that happened very similar with Rav Chisda. It's interesting because in the beginning they said ask Rav Chisda, right? And in the end we do get an answer from Rav Chisda, who went to Rav Huna to ask, who went and found out from Rav. Kol mamon she'en yachol lehotzio b'dayanim, disho eno kadosh. If you have a claim on something that you don't have proof of that would be upheld in court, then your sanctification is not valid. So there's our answer. This person was fighting over the bathhouse with someone else. They obviously didn't have proof, whether it was theirs or the other person's, and they sanctified it. It's not valid. Now, this assumes what, though? But wait, are you trying to say then, in a different case, if a person were to have proof that could hold up, okay, so we have a debate about this bathhouse, let's say, we're fighting over who owns it, and I have a deed for it. I just haven't brought my deed to court yet. But once the court would see my deed, it would be obvious that I'm the one who owns it. If that's the case, so I have proof, I haven't yet proven it in court though, but it is proof that would be upheld in court, and I sanctify it, then my sanctification is valid. So the Gemara is saying, how could you possibly say that? This contradicts something we learned not so long ago in Bava Kama. Ha'amar Rabbi Yochanan. So in other words, remember, there's two sides here. The answer to the bathhouse is clear. The person had no proof that would be upheld in court. Their sanctification is invalid. Okay? Just because you have a claim to something doesn't give you the rights to be able to sanctify. But the reverse of this, the inverse of this statement, which is basically if you did have proof, you'd be able to sanctify it, even though what? Even though currently it's not in your physical possession, because you haven't yet gone to court to basically show it's yours, it would be valid. But Hamar Rabbi Yochanan, didn't Rabbi Yochanan say, Gazal v'lo nityashu ba'alim? Okay, this takes us back to Bava Kama. If someone steals, okay, so you steal my property or something of mine, we'll see what it is, but you steal something, and I don't give up hopes of getting it back. So that means it's still mine, but you've stolen it. So it's in your property right now. Neither one of us can sanctify it, which basically means if we did, it's invalid. Why? Well, I can't say, you can't sanctify it because you stole it. It's not yours. You're not the owner of it. I can't sanctify it because even though it's mine and I haven't given up hope, I haven't despaired of getting it back. So technically speaking, the object is still owned by me, but it's not in my possession. One can only sanctify something that's physically in one's possession. So that contradicts the statement we just made. What did Rav say? Rav said, you can actually sanctify it, even if it's not in your physical domain, as long as you can prove it in court. So what do they answer? We were talking about a bathhouse. Now, what? Did you think we're talking about movable property? B'misuta mekarka askina. Misuta is land. We're not talking about, the stuff in the bathhouse. We're talking about the physical space of the bathhouse. That's land that's attached to the ground. And this also brings us back to Bava Kama. We learned a lot of Bava Kama that if land is stolen, no matter what, the land is always in my name. If it's movables, then already we can have a case where the thief gains rights to it. So that already means it's not so much in my domain anymore. But land will always be in my domain, whether I'm physically there or it's physically considered mine right now, or we're having an argument about that. That's a whole different story. So basically, again, we've put the bathhouse issue a bit aside because this particular bathhouse we already resolved. Sanctification is not valid because the person who was fighting over it and claimed rights to the whole thing didn't have proof that they were the owner. So the sanctification was invalid. However, if one of them had a proof, one had a deed and the other one didn't, and they sanctified it, it would be valid. But that point will only work in land. If it's metaltalin, if it's movable property and someone else is holding the item, or someone is holding half and I sanctify I'm holding half, but I sanctify the entire thing, that's not valid because when it comes to movables, I can't sanctify something that is not physically in my domain, whereas land is different. Land is always considered physically in my domain, even if it's not. Okay, that's the difference. So that's, again, kind of an aside because it didn't have to do with this, with the particular case of the bathhouse, but because, again, the bathhouse, no one had any proof of. But if you would have proof it was yours, you'd be able to sanctify land, property, things like that, but not movable items. Okay, moving on. Tani Rav Tachlifa Rav Tachlifa, who came from Israel, brought a braita kamei de Rabbi Avahu. And this is going to a bit change our understanding of the Mishna. Shnaim adukim b'tallit. Two people are holding a tallit. Ze notel ad makom she'ado magat, v'ze notel ad makom she'ado magat. Okay, now, if we're each holding this tallit, okay, so here's my example of a tallit. If you're watching the video, we're each holding on part. Now, notice when I hold it, I'm not holding to exactly the center. I'm holding, part of it. So each one we measure. Where do your fingers get to? Where do my fingers get to? That each side gets. Okay, and now we're going to have to reinterpret our Mishnah based on this. But each one gets to where their fingers are. So you could have 35% and I could have 28%. Okay? Then what do we do with the rest? The rest gets split 50-50. Okay, so zenotel ad yadoshim amakom she'ado magat. You get to exactly, we measure where your hands are up to. Okay, it sounds a little like a football game, like where exactly we measure the yard line, what exactly did you get to? Zenotel ad makom she'ado magat. And then the rest, chokim shaveh. Whatever's left in the middle, you split 50-50. Now, machvele Rabbi Avahu. Rabbi Avahu lifted up his hand to kind of show him. Ubeshvua, but you forgot the main point, right? You said this braita, obviously they have to take an oath. There's a bit of a debate, I'm not going to get into it, but you can look at Tosfot. Tosfot says, machvele Rabbi Avahu v'hashar beshvua. The rest you take an oath about, meaning the part you split 50-50, not the part you're holding. But Tosfot basically says that's wrong, okay? I don't think you use the word bishar. You actually have to swear about the entire thing. You have to take an oath about where your hand is up to and about the part that you're going to get. You basically have to take an oath about half, or it could be more than half. It could be 65%, whatever it is. The Rambam and others actually have the version that's bashar, okay? Only the rest you have to take an oath about where your hand is. You actually don't even need an oath, okay? Which is going to, particularly according to that reading, we're going to have a bigger question on our Mishnah. I'm not going to, again, technically speaking, in the end, the Rambam agrees that you have to take an oath on the whole thing, but that's more from like a Gilgul Shvua perspective. If you're already taking a Shvua on the 50-50 part, then we'll make you take a Shvua on the whole thing. But again, a bit of an aside, so let's get back to our topic. So basically, we have two people holding. We're going to give everyone to where their hand reaches, and the rest we're going to split 50-50, and they have to take an oath, either on the whole thing or on the 50-50 part. Ve'ela. So now the Gemara says, "Matnitin dekatane depalge bahadade velo katane zenotel ad gadosh makom she'ado magat hechim mishkachala." What's the case in our Mishnah then? Didn't we think that our Mishnah was each one's holding? Now, you might imagine, okay, each one's holding half exactly, and maybe that's our Mishnah, but there's no such thing as exact. And that's why I thought of football, right? You measure it, if you measure exactly to what exact point did this get, you're almost never going to have a case where each one is exactly holding 50% of the tallit, which means that what's the case in our Mishnah? Why didn't our Mishnah point out this thing about ad makom she'ado magat? Doesn't really make sense. So Amar Rav Papa, we're now going to understand our Mishnah differently. Our Mishnah isn't this image we have of this one with his hand on that side and this one with their hand on the other side and they're pulling. No, Rav Papa says, Ditfise bekar kashta. They're each holding on to the threads at the end of the garment, meaning nobody actually has a hold on the garment. If someone actually had a real hold on the garment and was holding part of the actual garment, then they would get to wherever their hand reached. They would get to wherever their hand reached and we'd split the rest 50-50. But they must have each been holding on to threads at the side that were coming off. So that's the issue. And then nobody really had any part of the actual garment. Okay, tough. Now we're going to take this halacha of people, okay, just the general halacha. I could be holding on to something and you could be holding on to, that's really a very interesting concept. I'm holding on to part of something and you're holding on to part of something. Maybe even here, I should take a scarf. It would be even a better example. Okay, here's my scarf. So we're each holding on to part of this scarf. Now, how is one part of this scarf mine while you're pulling on the other side? It's very strange. Usually, right? If you can be pulling and take it, right? It's maybe this goes back to yesterday where takif, right? We'll actually grab the whole thing. This shows that I could have ownership over part while you're holding on to the other part. So comes Rav Masharshia and he says, Shma Mina, you can infer from here, and he's now going to compare it to another case. We're going to compare it to two other things. He's going to first compare it to a case where it's actually the same. Hi, sudara. What's a sudara? Sudar is usually like a handkerchief or something, but it's called a kinyan sudar. We've learned about this. It's where one person lifts a handkerchief, right, as a symbolic act of acquiring something. Now, basically, if we're doing a sale and we want to agree on the sale, right, nowadays people might do a handshake or more likely they'll sign, right, they'll sign a document. But in those days, one of the ways they would do it was they would lift a handkerchief, right, which we do in, if you sell your chametz, often they do that, and, a symbolic act. You lift a handkerchief, and that's a symbolic act that you've been given something by the other person. That's the idea, basically. So he says the following, Hi, sudar. Now, normally you think of a handkerchief. So what do? You pick up the handkerchief. But they're discussing a case where, let's say you have this long scarf, and one person who's doing the transaction is holding part of it, and you lift up a part of it while it's still being held by the other person. So he says the following, this sudar, kevan di tafis ba shalosh al shalosh. As long as the part that you are picking up is 3 fingers, right, the width of my 3 fingers by 3 fingers, okay, it's about this size. Okay, as long as you're lifting up that size, then karina bevenatan lere'eu. It's considered that your friend, the other person you're doing the deal with, gave you this piece of it. It's viewed as separate from the rest of the scarf. Okay, this is separate from this. Even though the other person's holding the other part of the scarf, you still have ownership. It's as if they gave you this corner. And that's what he basically learns from our thing, because we could have 2 people grabbing the same thing, and yet one can say, I have ownership on the part I'm holding. It's basically the same idea. So now the Gemara is going to ask, okay, vikani, and therefore can acquire it. But why? We're now going to compare it to a different case where this doesn't work. And this is going to be in a divorce case. So how is this different from what Rav Chisda said? Because Rav Chisda says, get biyada u'mishicha biyado. You might remember, where else do you need giving? In a get. The husband has to give the get to the wife, and the wife has to receive it. So now, what if she's holding the get, and he's holding a string that's attached to the get? Okay, so we have a get on one side. Let's use our, okay. There's a little string attached to the get, and he's holding the other side of this. Okay, so what happens now? If he can pull it without, let's say, the get being detached from the string, let's say it's something strong, it's held up very strongly, and he could pull the whole thing and get the get right back, well, then she's not divorced. But if not, if he can't pull it, meaning if he were to pull it, his string would just detach, and he would be left with the string, and she would be left with the get, well, then that would obviously work. But what do you see here? If he can pull it and pull it to him, then it's not a get. Why not? Isn't this the same as we just said? Right, all the more so. We're talking about not even the same object. This is a get with something attached to it. And yet he can pull it away, right? It's not considered that she received it, since potentially he can pull it away. Same thing with our tallit. Why should I get part of it when you could actually pull the whole thing away from me? So they say, and you might remember from Yitim, we learned this a lot of times, Hatam kritu b'inam v'leika, hachanatina b'inam v'ha'ika. When it comes to giving, if a get was all about giving only, it would work. This is an act of giving. So when it comes to a kinyan, when it comes to, our case, you just need it to be given or in the possession of the person. But when it comes to a get, you need complete separation. If the husband can pull the get back, that means he's still somewhat controlling her, right? And The whole idea of get is it's a get of separation. They have to be completely separated. There were tons of ramifications. We saw this in Gittin. This is another one. If he could pull the get back to him, that means she hasn't really received it. Okay, because as long as he's still controlling things, then they're still in a marriage. That's why it's not valid. So that's a whole different case. Okay, moving on. Amarava. If the tallit had gold in it, you split the part with the gold 50-50, which the Gemara says pshita, right? We're assuming, what do you mean, right? We're splitting the tallit in half. We assume the gold is spread evenly throughout the tallit, of course. What we're saying that the gold is in the middle, which the Gemara said that didn't help. Obviously, if the gold, and that's okay, it's not fully gold, there's gold in the middle, but okay, the gold is in the middle. Obviously, we're splitting it 50-50, so each one will get half the gold. Hanami pshita, that's also obvious. Okay, let's say you're holding it at the top right, and I'm holding it at the bottom left. And let's say the gold is closer. Let's say the gold goes from right to left, but it goes at the 20% mark at the top. So you have the gold closer to your hand, right, where you're holding. And you say, oh, 50-50, let's split it 50-50 along the width. And then I'll get, right, you'll get the whole part with the gold, and I will get none of the gold. So it's right. You might have thought you can claim, oh, split it this way, and I'll get all the gold. You say, no. We split it 50-50 down the center. Okay? And therefore it's going to be even between you and me. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we're moving to a different topic. Same topic, but instead of two people holding a tallit, two people are holding a document. Shnayim adukim b'shtal. Mal ve'omer shalihu v'nafal mimeni u'mitzativ v'lo ve'amar shalcha u'prativ lecha. So we have a case. Let's remember how shtarot work. If it's a loan, usually what happens is we take a loan, we write an IOU, and who keeps it? Obviously, if I borrow money from you, you're going to keep it because you want to collect the loan. The only way you're going to collect this loan is by providing the shtar. Without a shtar, you're not going to be able to get your loan back. Maybe if it was whatever, but it's going to be much harder. If I pay back the money, then you give me the document because I want to make sure that you never try to collect this loan again. And I have it and I keep it as my proof that I've paid the loan. What if we're both holding it? So the Malva says, oh, it dropped, I lost it and here it is and I'm holding it. And the Lova says, what do you mean? I dropped it. I already paid back the money. It was from me. And I don't have to pay anything. So what do we do? And we're going to have a machloket. We're not going to fully understand it yet. Rebbi says, we go by, if the signatures are valid, then it's a valid shtar. Okay? We don't know what this means yet. So what does it mean? Then the Malva can get it. So what if it's valid? It's still not clear who owns it. Rashbag omer yachlok. Rashbag says we split it 50-50. Okay? Basically, I'm going to have to pay you back half the loan. Nafal liyad dayan, case 2 here. It wasn't that we're both holding it. We're not both holding it. And it fell near a judge. Okay, we don't know what this means yet. We're going to have to figure it out. Lo yotziu olamit. We leave it in the court, okay? Or never to be collected until we figure out really whose it was. Rabbi Yosi omer harehu b'chezkato. Okay, no, what do you mean? B'chezkato means we leave it as a general, what do we assume if there's a document? It's an IOU. The lova never paid, and the lova has to pay it back. Okay, the borrower has to pay the loan back. Okay, so one says nobody pays, and the other one says you fully pay. So now let's leave the Dayan case aside. Let's go back to the first. Amar Mar, quote from before, Yitkayem ashtar b'chotama, which sounds like then the malveh can collect the loan, because if you can validate the document, then we do what the document says. Really? Gavele malveh kule? Should the malveh get the whole thing? But what do you mean? The lova is holding half of it, right? Or part, right? They're both grabbing onto it. Didn't we say you generally split? So if the document is validated, why do we give the whole thing to the borrower, to the creditor? Doesn't make any sense. So they answer, okay, so it's not what we thought. What he's saying is we go and we validate it. If it's valid, then we split it 50-50. And then I agree with Rashbag. When do I disagree with Rashbag? If we can't actually prove that this is a valid document, then, this is very interesting, Rebbi Savar Rebbe holds that if we have a document, not connected to this case, we find a document, it's an IOU, and we don't know that the signatures are valid, but the Lova agrees that it's a valid document, okay, which is our case. The Lova says there's a valid star. The Lova just says I paid it back, but the Lova agrees it's a valid document. That's not enough. Just because the Lova agrees that the document is valid, we still have to validate it in court, which means if it's not validated, the only validity this document has is the Lova admitting that it's validated. Why is that relevant? Well, so first of all, we go and try to ratify it. If we ratify it and we show it's a valid document, tallit. Then we split it 50-50. Because it's a valid document, it was validated in court, great. Then we just don't know whose it is, we split it 50-50. But if we can't validate it, then we don't split it. Why? My timer. This is like a random piece of paper. It's got no validity to it. What gives it validity? Who makes this a star? Lova. The fact that the Lova admitted that he owed the money and he took out the loan and it's a valid loan gives it validity. But Haka'amar de Paria. But that same Lova said, but I paid it back. In other words, this is what we call in halacha, hapesh asal hu hapesh yitil. The same mouth that said it's forbidden, meaning I owe money, also said I don't owe money. In other words, the only validity we have for the shtar right now is the Lova admitting. If the Lova didn't admit, it wouldn't be anything. It would be a stam random piece of paper that has no validity. So the Lova gave it validity, but in the same mouthful, the Lova said, but I already paid it back. And as I agree this is a shtar, but I paid it back. So he's fully believed and doesn't have to pay anything. That's what Rebbi says. Rabban Shimon Gamliel savar, if the Lova admits to the shtar, that gives the shtar validity. You don't need kiyum with edim. You don't need to prove that the signatures are valid, which means he doesn't think there's hapesh asar hapesh yitir here because there's a written document that actually has validity to it now because he gave it validity. Now the shtar has validity. Because the shtar has validity, we're actually not going to believe him necessarily that it was paid back. And therefore, and therefore we're back to, it's a debate between the two, and we're going to split it 50-50 because we don't know who's right. So basically, they disagree only in a case where it wasn't validated by the court. Rebbi's going to say the Lova has to pay nothing. And Rashbag is going to say achloku. So that's the first machlok. Nafali yadayan lo yotziu olami. Now we're going to get to the second machlok, which we really didn't understand so well. Mishna liyad dayan. Why does it matter if we find it by a dayan? What if we find it on the street? In other words, the whole point of this case we thought was that each was, right? It's just a case where no one's holding on to the shtar. Who cares if we found it in the shuk? Who cares if we found it there? So, Amar Rafa hachi kamar. You misunderstood what nafal lifnei dayan. It doesn't mean literally it fell and is found next to the judge. Achar shematzah shtar shenafal liyad dayan. It's after we find a shtar, and it's a case that we found a shtar that had already come before a judge. Fall, not in the sense of it fell there, but it had fallen, meaning it had crossed the path of a dayan. What does that mean? It's where the document had already been validated in the court. It had a stamp of the court saying, this is a valid loan. Lo yotziu olamit. Now, and then, basically, once it's validated by the court, and no one's holding on to this, no one can claim this loan, okay? The malva can't claim, I need to get paid back. We're going to have to understand this in a minute, but let's just say, lo mebai, you don't even need to say lo kata behenpe. If it didn't have a stamp of the court, of course, no one would be able to collect this. Why? Because it's an obvious claim you could make. If it didn't have a stamp of the court, it very well could be that they planned to take out a loan. They wrote up the document, and then the creditor never gave the money. Maybe there was no loan at all. So for sure, because again, you have to assume the malva, it's like in the olden days when you used to get a credit from a store. Right nowadays, most things are electronic. But if you get a credit from a store, you're going to make sure to keep it. You returned an item, you have a credit. If you lose that, you're basically losing money. So you keep it in your wallet, you make sure you always have it. So here also, the malva is going to make sure he really has it. So the fact that we found it on the street and the malva is not holding it already makes us suspect that something was going on. So if it wasn't validated at all, then we just assume that maybe there was no loan ever taken. And it was just, they were going to, it never happened. But even if it was stamped by the court, that was ratified, Lo yachzir dechashina lepiraon. Okay, and that's the Tanakama. The Tanakama basically says chosheshin lepiraon. Okay, meaning we're concerned, even though we have a document here, the fact that the malva doesn't have it makes us think that likely it was already returned. It was paid back. The Rabbi Yosi Omel, and here comes the dissenting opinion, and this is going to cause a great problem. Harehu b'chezkato. What do you mean? We assume most documents, if the document's still in existence, probably it wasn't paid back. Now, this is probably because often they would rip it up once it was paid back. So there he thinks, no, the malva can actually collect the whole. So again, according to Tanakama, the rabbis, the malva collects nothing. According to Rabbi Yosi, the malva collects everything. Below chashin on the piraon, and we're not worried that maybe they paid it back. So now we're going to have a problem because this is going to contradict Rabbi Yosi somewhere else. And for this, we're going to have three different answers. Below chayish Rabbi Yosi the piraon. What do you mean? He's not worried that a document that you find in the street is already paid back. Look at this source. Bahatanya. Matzah shtar ketuba b'shuk. If you find a ketuba in a shuk, now what's a ketuba if not an IOU? It's the same thing. It's that the husband owes the woman money in a case of divorce or death. So, if he dies, matzah shtar ketuba b'shuk. Bisman shabal modeh. If the husband admits he never gave the money back, and it's the wife's ketuba, she gets it back and she can collect. Ein habal modeh. But if the husband doesn't admit that this is his ketuba, that he never paid the wife back, lo yachzir lo lezeh v'lo lezeh. He doesn't get it. She doesn't get it. Because what? Chosheshin lepiraon. Okay, this is perfect. This matches the rabbis. The rabbis in the first case are concerned for piraon, and in this case are concerned for piraon, right? We worry that maybe he paid it back. So that maybe he already paid her the ketuba, which means she doesn't get it back. Rabbi Yosi Omel, now remember, Rabbi Yosi before says, we're not worried he paid her back. But listen to Rabbi Yosi here. Rabbi Yosi says, Oda tacha ba'ala yachzir la'isha. If she's still married, then we give it back to the woman. We assume it wasn't paid back. That all is fine. But nit armala or nit garsha. But if she's divorced or widowed, lo yachzir lo lezeh v'lo lezeh. We don't return it to either one of them because we're concerned for piraon. So this goes against what Rabbi Yosi said, that we're not concerned. Right here, we're concerned he already paid her the money. So therefore, she's not going to get it back. To which we say, to resolve this problem, answer number one. So basically, our issue is, Rabbi Yosi says in our case, we're not concerned. The malva gets it back. He could collect his loan. In the ketuba case, the woman doesn't get it back. So, ipuch. Switch Rabbi Yosi and Chachamim in our source, in our braita. And Rabbi Yosi is the one who actually says it's left for good, just like he says it by the woman. Nafal liyad dayan lo yotziu olamit. Divrei Rabbi Yosi. The first opinion is Rabbi Yosi. We leave it because we're worried about piraon, that it might have been paid back already. And therefore, the lova doesn't have to pay it back. And Chachamim are the ones who say hareu b'chezkato. Right? The Chachamim are the ones who say, no, we're not worried about piraon, and therefore, right, we give it back. So now they're going to say, ihachi kasha d'Rabbanan d'Rabbanan. If so, then we just flip the opinions. If we flip the opinions, the rabbis are going to contradict what they say in the ketuba case now. It's not going to fit. It's the rabbis now in that case contradict with the rabbis there. Shtar ketuba kula Rabbi Yosi. So to resolve the contradiction between the rabbis now in the ketuba case and the rabbis in the loan case, again, the rabbis say here in this case, harehu b'chezkato, right? That we're going to leave the money, we're going to leave the shtar as is, meaning the malva can collect the loan. Okay, when it comes to, right, that basically means we're not concerned that they gave it back. And the rabbis now in the other case say, right, the rabbis say, lo yachzir lo lezeh v'lo lezeh, she doesn't get it back because we are chosheshin that maybe she got her money back. So that's the opposite, okay? We should actually give it back to the woman. So we have a contradiction in the rabbis, to which they say, so again, we're still in answer number one. We switch the opinions, but that created a new problem with the rabbis. Well, shtar ketuba kula Rabbi Yosi. We say, oh, there's actually not a machloket in the ketuba case. The whole braita there is Rabbi Yosi, and this is how you should read it. It's missing words, and this is how it should read, which means there is no rabbi's opinion there that contradicts the rabbis now in the original braita. Okay, that's how we resolve it. Okay, here's how you read the braita. Let's start from the beginning. If the husband does not admit to the fact that, right, this is his wife's ketuba, meaning he claims he paid her already, then lo yachzir lo lezeh v'lo lezeh, then nobody gets it back. But in which case does nobody get it back? Meaning the wife can't collect. In which case can't she collect? Binit armala unit garsha, if she was widowed or divorced. But she can get it back if she's still married to him. Why? It's obvious, because if she's still married, she probably didn't get paid the ketuba. You don't usually pay it when the woman's alive, when the husband's alive. Rabbi Yosi because that's what Rabbi Yosi holds. Okay, he splits between times. He says if it's earlier, where it's unlikely she got paid back, then we don't assume she got paid back. We can give it back to her. If it's later, then no. But the point is, the whole braita is Rabbi Yosi, and then there's no contradiction, rabbis and rabbis. So basically, what we did in the first answer is, since Rabbi Yosi contradicts himself in both sources, we flipped who said what in our braita. Then we had a contradiction between the rabbis, and we said, oh, that's not a problem because the rabbis really don't exist in the braita. The whole braita is Rabbi Yosi. That was answer number one. Answer number two, Rav Papa amar lo olam lo tepul. You don't have to flip the opinions. What do we do with the fact that Rabbi Yosi in the ketuba, again, Rabbi Yosi Bayas said we're not concerned it was payback, and in the ketuba case he is concerned, to which they say, don't understand Rabbi Yosi. Instead of saying now the whole braita is Rabbi Yosi, which we did last time, we're not going to say nothing's really Rabbi Yosi in the braita. Rabbi Yosi talks in the braita, so how do we explain? Rabbi Yosi ledivreihem de Rabbanan kamar. Rabbi Yosi, when he spoke up in the braita, was talking to the rabbis according to their approach. Okay, let's read. They said you don't return it at all. Okay? The wife never gets it back. To which Rabbi Yosi said, what do you mean the wife never gets it back? Ledidi, according to me, remember, what's Rabbi Yosi's opinion in our braita? Lo choshishin lepiron. We're not worried it was paid back. So he says, I think we're never worried the woman got her ketuba back, meaning we're always going to give her ketuba back. We're never worried that the husband paid it already, even if she's divorced or widowed. So ledidi, according to me, she could be divorced, widowed. We don't think she got her ketuba money yet. Ledidchu, but according to you, who thinks that it's likely she got paid back, at least make a distinction between she's married, not married, right? In other words, odili miyad, at least admit to me, if she's still married, we should assume the woman didn't get her ketuba money because she only gets her ketuba when she gets divorced or widowed. Because the time to pay didn't even come yet. How can you possibly claim that she already got her ketuba money? Now, what are the rabbis going to disagree with him about? They're going to say, no, we disagree. Amrle Rabbanan, you might remember this from Tubot and Gitin. We assume that the husband puts aside money in his lifetime for the ketuba, because the ketuba is a t'nai beitin, as we call it. It's such a done thing. It's going to go to her eventually. So he usually puts aside money and leaves it there. Sometimes in her lifetime, she might need money, because remember, the woman doesn't have her own funds. And sometimes he might give her money, even when they're married, from the ketuba account. So because of that, there is a concern, the rabbis say, that even he paid her back, even if they're still married. Okay, so that was a way that we explained the braita. Third answer for the contradiction, Ravina amar lolam ipuch kamaita. We are going to flip the two opinions in the first braita, in the case for our case. How does that relate to the ketuba case? And we said, but the rabbis contradict each other. And here we're not going to say there is no rabbi's opinion, like we said the first answer. Tama de Rabbanan, he's just going to say the ketuba case is different. In a normal case, again, the rabbis are not concerned that it was paid back. And basically, theoretically, in the ketuba case, the woman should get the ketuba back. But what's the concern? They're actually concerned for something else. Mishum dechayshin on the shtei ketubot. We're worried maybe the woman has two ketubas. Why on earth would a woman have two ketubas? Well, remember, the woman's supposed to keep her ketuba. In fact, what do we do nowadays? Right? Either it's on your wall, or really what you're supposed to do is put it in a very safe place. Many women give it to their mothers, and their mothers keep their ketubas as a protection. Again, that not be in their own house in case the husband takes it, since it's an IOU, so they give it to their mothers. Why was this ketuba in the shuk? One possibility could be it got lost. Now, when a ketuba gets lost, you have to write a new ketuba. So if we find this ketuba in the shuk, maybe it was a lost one, and maybe they wrote a new one, and maybe it's a totally invalid document. That's what the rabbis are concerned about, and that's why they don't take this ketuba seriously. Not because they think it was paid back, because they think maybe it was lost. And Rabbi Yosi, the shtei ketubot lo chayish, she's not worried about that. Why? He actually thinks that if you lose your ketuba, you don't have to write a new one. Why not? Because like I said before, a ketuba is a t'nai beitin. Even if a husband didn't write a ketuba for his wife, she gets to collect the ketuba money in the event of death or divorce. So you don't really need to write a new one, according to him. And that's why we're not worried that you're going to have two ketubas. The one got lost and you wrote a new one in its stead. If this is the one that got lost, great. This is the one that got lost, take it back. And then the chosheshin is a totally different chosheshin, and therefore it's not even a contradiction. Okay. So again, we thought this was the same idea. So both the first two answers, it is, and we just tried to resolve everything. In the last answer, we just say this is a totally different issue. Okay. Amar Rabbi Elazar, we're going to end with this last part. When we talk, okay, there's tofes and a toref. What's the tofes? Or let's start with the toref. This we had in get, but it's a little different in a document. Toref is the main body, which says we took a loan on this and this day, blah, 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 blah. Tofes is the summary line at the end, because I'm going with some commentaries. Summary line at the end, which says this was a loan between so-and-so and so-and-so for this amount of money, but it doesn't say the date, which is going to be very relevant. So if both are holding parts and, part of the tofes is on my side and part of the toref is on my side, part of the tofes and part of the toref, right? Imagine here's the document, right? We're each holding half and the tofes and the toref go across, great. But, and then we're going to split it 50-50. But if one is holding the top part of it and the other is holding the bottom part, so the one who's holding the top has the toref, and the one who's holding the bottom has the tofes. Zenotel tofes for zenotel toref. Okay, comes Rabbi Elazar and says this whole thing of yachloku is only in the case of both are holding the tofes and both the toref. But if one's holding the tofes, one's holding the toref, one's going to get the tofes and one's going to get the toref. Okay, what does that mean? We don't know yet. Okay, we'll get to what the relevance is. Rabbi Yochanan amar lo olam chokim. Rabbi Yochanan says no matter what, they split it 50-50. So now they say, wait. What? How could you say that? If one's holding the tofes and one's holding the toref, they each have different values. Didn't we say you get the part you're holding on to? So how could you even say that? So actually, we're going to say he doesn't disagree with Rabbi Elazar. He's actually just talking about another case, which is it's if the toref is in the middle, which this is like the gold. So the Marga says, what's it teaching? If the toref is in the middle, the toref is in the middle, obviously they split it 50-50. So it's closer to the hand of one of them than the other. Again, maybe you'll say, like with the gold, split it in this way, and then I'll get the whole toref. They say, no. In the end, you're going to have to split it in the middle. Okay? So, but let's go back to Rabbi Elazar. He says, what's it going to help you? In other words, what's the tofes going to help the person? It's what? He's going to use it as a cover for his, you're going to cut the document in half. What's he going to do with the tofes? It doesn't have like the date or anything, right? He's going to just use it as a cover, the piece of paper as a paper to cover his jug. Okay, and basically this is asking, what does it mean to one gets the tofes and one gets the toref? To which they answer, Amar le'ledami, da'amar hachi, shtarit di'ipezma. Okay, you know what? Let's leave this for tomorrow, and we'll explain the difference between this and tomorrow's class. Okay, so let's spend the last minute reviewing. What we did today was we finished up the Sfeiko case. We had two last issues, which is what does it say when it says Safek Bechor Chnas Ladir? Which Safek can actually be counted for the Maser Behema? It's not every Safek case. Then we went to what's the halacha with the bathhouse? What's the bottom line? We said at the end it doesn't work, but we did say that if it can be proven in court, if it was property, it would actually work to sanctify, not if it was movable. Then we brought this braita of each one holding it to where his hand can get to, and then we had to reinterpret our Mishna and what exactly was going on there. We compared it then to a kinyan sudar case and to a get case, showed in one case it was similar to it, in another case it's very different, with two people holding on to different sides of the same item. Then we talked about the gold issue and how to split it when there's gold in it. Then we got to this big case of two people holding on to a document. They're holding on. We have a debate about between Rebbi and Rashbag. We have to figure out exactly what the debate between them is. Then we went on to the second debate, which was what if neither of them is holding on to the star, but we just find it in the street? What do? We have Rabbi Yosi and the rabbis, but then that contradicted or seemed to contradict what they said by a ketuba case. And then we had three possible ways to resolve that. And then we ended with this toref and tofes, which we haven't really fully understood yet. What could it mean that I get the tofes and you get the toref? So that's going to be left for tomorrow's class. I'll end here for today. Wishing everybody a good day and b'sovat tova.